Okay. Here we are. Hi, everybody. This is panel number 2 in the environment series. We're going to talk about the environment and learning at Pathfinder. And I'll just start. My name's Will Hopkins. I was senior staff here for a while. The last time I worked was 2009, and I had a lot of jobs, but one of them was teaching. I'll tell a little story. When I was a Cree, I went during afternoon optionals. I went to nature lore with Lance, and Lance said, "Okay, let's go." And we walked up, and we got over near the log cabin, and we stopped there along the trail. And Lance pointed out these little white celery-looking things that were coming out of the ground, and he said, "These are non-photosynthetic plants, and they feed off of just the nutrients and the biomatter in the ground." And I thought that was the coolest thing. And when I became an adult, I figured, wow, that's probably because the guys are taking their leaks right there, and it's really. But as a kid, I thought that was the coolest thing. And I love this island, and I love this park, and I think being taught about this place and having a sense of place here more than any other place on the planet made me want to give that to others and become a teacher. And so I've become a teacher in my career and taught science and environmental education and a lot of other things. And so I think that how we cultivate that sense of place through a variety of programs is a tremendously important part of camp. The one thing I'll say before kicking it off down the panel is that in all of its iterations, these programs at camp are personality and passion driven. And so as people come in with a vision and an energy, the programs blossom and take on philosophy. And that rotates over the generations as the personalities and the passions change. So I hope during this presentation that you'll hear about nature lore, that you'll hear about earth lore, that you'll hear about paddle and paint program, that you'll hear about the new woodworking program and the newest program called traditional lore. And so we'll go down the line. Each of the panelists will just introduce themselves and share a little bit about their experiences in this realm. And then when we get to the end, we'll open it up for questions and comments. Okay, Lance, can we start with you?
Sure.
Okay.
Going by age, I see. Although not quite. Okay, I'm Lance Kennedy, and when I started at Camp Pathfinder in 1960, one of my great interests in the camp was, in fact, nature lore. There was a nature counselor at the time, Tom Krakauer, and I think I was drawn to nature lore because I was a nerd, and Tom Krakauer was a nerd, but he was also, incredibly knowledgeable. He was one of these who had grown up with it, and he was one of these where if you heard a bird, he'd know who it was, call it by name and everything. So we used to go around in the mornings and do bird walks, and then he knew all the plants and so on. So I absorbed all this and then eventually became the nature lore counselor. And the one thing that I want to talk about briefly is just the transition from the time that I became nature lore counselor to umpteen years later when somebody else picked it up. It's probably safe to say that in the early days, nature lore didn't get a whole lot of respect around here, except from my fellow nerds. But then there began to be a real change in the ethos of the tripping program, and you heard a little bit about it in the preceding seminar. Suddenly, this group became less a group of gladiators that went out and conquered the wilderness to a group of outdoor educators who are out there respecting the wilderness and getting everybody else to love it. And suddenly, by God, nature lore was cool. And I was the guy. And so, some of the happiest moments of my life were when I think this guy was tripping director at the time. They would send the head men out with me to show, learn the trees and that sort of thing. And suddenly everybody was into that, and I think that's the kind of outdoor educator that they have at Camp Pathfinder today, and I'm very proud of it.
Thank you. I should mention that one of our missing panelists today is Chris Brackley, who couldn't be here. And his one of his great gifts to camp was the Earth Lore program that you may have heard a little bit about, and I think directly succeeded the Nature Lore program. Mike Floyd was the Earth Lore director after Chris Brackley, and will share a little bit. All right.
Yeah, so building off of what Will said about sort of that transition and what Lance mentioned too about moving beyond sort of that simple taxonomy and identifying things. Earth Lore was really Brackley's sort of marrying, Michelle talked about it, but marrying the Indian Lore program and the Nature Lore program and make it more experiential and getting out there and, seeing the park in a more thorough way and getting off of the canoe routes was really a big emphasis that occurred. And it wasn't that Nature Lore wasn't useful and that identifying things wasn't necessarily skill, but like Lance said, it was maybe kind of nerdy, and Brackley's passion for just being out there and inspiring that wonder and that sense of place was what drove the Earth Lore program to sort of not really take the place of, but sort of fill in and add and augment what we thought of as Nature Lore and Indian Lore, and that those were really, it was more a comprehensive natural history program. What that resulted in really was, I think the biggest impact has been to our tripping program, that we have guides who are more confident and knowledgeable now than any previous generation about the place, the history, the geology, and they're also confident in their ability to navigate and to find their way. So map and compass was a big skill that we started introducing, and that was something that was a passion of mine, was more the technical side of navigation in the wilderness. So my role, Brackley's passion is nobody can live up to that. You know, there's no one that's going to imitate that. So my role was more, I worked with him a lot to sort of build that technical prowess among our guides so that we could take these trips to new places, to areas that didn't have canoe routes. We could make that bush from Eustache to White Partridge and nail it, and not be lost out there, hopefully, and really make our guides more confident and more skilled. And I think that's what's enabled our tripping program to go to some of the most amazing locations that we've seen in the last few years. Earth Lore was really a way to get people to a higher level of their ecological literacy and their ability to navigate and be confident guides out here. And personally, it really inspired me ultimately in my career outside of camp to go to school, to become an outdoor educator, and ultimately now a career that I love, that grew directly out of my experience with the Earth Lore and tripping program here. So, and I think that's safe to say for a lot of our current generation of head men, that they look at this not just as what they're doing after college or to fill in those years, but hey, there's a career track in this, and there's a real path out there for people who want to do these sort of things. So,
Cool. Let's skip from the 90s and 2000s a little bit back in time for some. I'm not sure what Bob did at camp, so I'll let him explain.
Well, this is actually for me very heartwarming to hear your comments, Mike, and certainly Lance and I have had discussions over some cold ones about this issue. I started in the late 40s as a young camper and then worked my way up into the 70s, and that's where I want to pick this part of the presentation. In the 70s, I was a director of tripping, and I missed one summer because I had the opportunity to go to a Knowles course in Wyoming, and that was about a 30-day plus adventure out in the mountains of northwest Wyoming and into Montana. Knowles is National Outdoor Leadership School. First of all, I'm Bob Roggow, and I have to back up. Okay, that's 2 G's. But anyway, so Knowles was founded by a gentleman named Paul Petzold, and he had worked for Outward Bound as sort of a guide for Outward Bound or whatever. And the history on that, as I understood it, was that he felt that the Outward Bound instructors, although they were very good in one aspect of helping people to find themselves and self-awareness and self-concept building, he felt that they were not technically good in terms of wilderness living and the skills necessary and the sensitivity to the environment and so on and so forth. So he founded the National Outdoor Leadership School, which is out of Lander, Wyoming. And it was his purpose to train individuals and hopefully recruit instructors from the pool of people that he trained to work for Outward Bound so that they could mesh not only the self-concept building aspects of Outward Bound, but they could mesh that with wilderness living and what he believed in his philosophy of wilderness living. So anyways, I took this course for 30 days, and here I had been up at Pathfinder as a head man for a number of years, had some experience with director of tripping responsibilities, and I'm out on this trail, and our leader is like 22 years old. At the time, I'm in my late 30s, mid to late 30s, and we had, it was a co-ed group, ages 16, and I was the oldest at about 36 years of age. And it was about less than 2 or 3 days in, the aha came to me. And the aha was that here I am with an instructor who knows 700 times more information about how to live in the wilderness than I did after I had spent, up until that point, probably 20 to 30 summers up at Pathfinder. And not only he, but his fellow instructors. And so I'm just taking, we actually were out there, we're doing a lot of hiking, climbing mountains, we're going down snowfields, glissading down snowfields, using ice picks, self-arresting down snowfields. But we have these classes while we're out there, and I am just writing down notes after notes, and the classes were on weather, they were on zero trace camping. Some people refer to it as ZEI, zero environmental impact aspects, and but just plants to eat, how you can live off the land, and so on and so forth. So just a myriad of a plethora, for that matter, of classes. And so I came out of that experience saying, since I was returning to Pathfinder, Roy was the owner, Roy Thrall at the time, returning to Pathfinder, that I wanted to introduce the idea of zero environmental impact camping, or zero trace camping, to Pathfinder, as well as to start the notion that our head men, and other trip staff for that matter, needed to develop the informational skills as well as the ability to convey that to campers on canoe trips, the information to promote the philosophy of ZEI features in our canoe tripping program. The difficulty for me was that on a personal level, I was only going to be here one summer at that time because I knew I was going to miss at least the next summer, and as it turned out, a couple summers for coming back up here. And when I did return, I didn't return in the tripping program as much as I was director of tripping. So the bottom line was in that summer, and I'm trying, my dates are meshing a little bit. It was 77 or somewhere 78. If Smitty were here, I'm sure he would remember. Okay. But here we go. But my staff at the time, the head men at the time, Mark Smith, GT, Sky, folks, etc., they had not had the experience that I had. They grew up in the Pathfinder experience of tripping, and there was a certain process procedure for tripping that we adhered to. The thought of having a camper enter into the cooking area, for instance, to help with the cooking was sort of that would be heresy. So there were certain roles that we all had on the trip, and to integrate those roles and integrate them in a way that it would educate campers into learning some of the things that the staff were responsible for, let alone learning about the environment, which is what Mike was referring to, and meshing all of that, just wasn't their way of thinking. It wasn't their framework, because it wasn't my framework prior to the Knowles experience. And so I understood that, but we tried during that summer to promote some ideas that might be offered, particularly allowing the campers to be more involved in the total tripping process. And that met with a bit of resistance. I think, if I remember, I saw it was like a scarecrow type of feature hung from a tree with my name on it somewhere on the island. I'm exaggerating, but so we at least tried to introduce that. And I can say Jerry Taylor at the time was up here, and he was involved in rock climbing and things like that. In fact, he introduced the rock climbing to Pathfinder, and then later on in the 80s, this was in the 70s, and in the 80s, he and Bill Jabs came up in the off season when Mac was camp owner, and built the first ropes course down beyond the basketball court. But anyways, Jerry took out a canoe trip, and he actually turned over the map to the camper to guide the trip. One of the campers, I know he tried that, and had them involved in the cooking in that. And Jerry was not a head man, but he had been through, Project Adventure and stuff like that with the ropes course, and I think he had, and certainly had an orientation towards incorporating campers into the involvement in canoe tripping. So I'm sort of moving back from in time to from Mike's comments and Lance's a little bit. Well, it's around the same time, Lance. We tried to do some coordination around teaching staff, but the bottom line is there's a gap of period between my experience that I'm describing to you and when Brackley and Mike and sort of the nature lore, the tripping came together. And so I just, it makes me proud in a sense to see what's happened to Pathfinder in terms of that integration and in terms of the environmental awareness aspects of people here, not only out on the trail, but in camp. So that's heartwarming, and yeah, I'm proud to be part of that.
Bob, you'll be pleased to know that when I was a camper and you weren't still working as a staff, people were still making fun of you, even though you weren't. What time is it? Can anyone tell me?
1:13.
1:13. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to hear, Jeff, we're going to hear from the present day folks, and then we're going to come right back to you. Kathryn and Warren are spearheading two wonderful programs that are existing today. And we're going to hear how about traditional lore and then a little bit about the woodworking.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kathryn. I was at Northway for 11 summers before I came here. I've been here for 5 years now. And we have a thing now it's called trad lore, which, like a lot of Pathfinder things, started as a joke and turned into a real thing. Simon Good and Townsend was doing earth lore, and then I was doing traditional skills, and they merged into trad lore, so now it's trad lore. But it's kind of heartening to hear what everyone's saying about these themes, and it seems like there's been a really consistent passion, a really consistent vision, and some very similar themes, and some similar struggles and successes. My hope with trad lore has been that it's augmenting the tripping program, but in a very natural way. I think for me, maybe when I was 13 or 14 years old out on a Northway trip, I just had this realization that we live in a playground, and that there's so much potential out there if you understand the place where we are. You don't need to feel alienated from Algonquin. You don't need to feel alone out there, and that you can feel empowered by the place. And so that's sort of been the spirit of trad lore right now, getting campers along that path, like you're saying, not having these skills be things that, like, well, you can't touch that skill until you're a headman. Why not start that skill now? And in a way, I see it as like a program for the Crees, really, to grab those 12-year-olds who are on the edge. And, you know, when you're 8, they're oblivious and they have no idea what's going on. And when they're 12, they're starting to figure it out. And trad lore is a way to grab them there. So I guess the best I can say is some of the things we're doing. I come from a history teaching background, so I have a lot of that going on. We do a Tom Thompson day hike where we go and we kind of map and compass our way to get to his old gravesite. We look at the old Moat village. We've got pictures of the old skull. We've got pictures of the old site. There's a lot of human history going on, a lot of Source Lake human history. We have a tripping AA that involves things like guiding the trip for a day, identifying trees, cooking a meal, doing a bear hang, knowing the North Star, do a lot of things like with weather. We had an adventure race this year that had a lot of that involved. There was a race to bush over from the old lumber road to the Mizzy Lake Trail. There was a race to set up a campsite and do a bear hang. And so my hope is that it isn't just a program for nerds, and we fight that. I think if we talk about where we're going next, it's hard because it does sometimes come into that. People think that you're just going to go out and do identifications of trees. I want it to be something that also is natural and doesn't feel like class. And the point is, and so it's a little artificial to have these 40-minute periods where you're doing it. That these are, I think, Treadlore is just the teachable moment that kind of defines traditional skills. That it's just these moments that come up when you're out on a trip, and so it's hard to work it into the in-camp program sometimes. And I think we're fighting that, but the hope is that it's sort of a natural integration with the tripping program, our life here in Algonquin.
Can you say a little bit about the Outpost?
Oh yeah, so 3 years ago, Warren and I went on an Outpost trip, and the idea was that we were going to set up a campsite. We went up to Burnt Root and brought an embarrassing amount of stuff with us, and so we had like Dutch ovens and cast iron cookware. We had tons of stuff for shelter building. We had like a little Hudson Bay axe. I don't know, we had all sorts of things. And so we set up this campsite up on Burnt Root, and then trips came to us and had a rest day there on our campsite. But we did things with them where we taught them shelter building. We taught them how to use the little axe and how to chop. We built a floating bonfire. We went fishing. We took them out and identified stars at night. So the idea was that it would be a rest day in the middle of their trip, but they would be meeting up with this sort of little Pathfinder outpost and practicing these skills on the trail and learning it.
Like real cooking.
Yeah, we did like their cooking. We did old, like, slow open fire cooking. And
Reflector oven.
yeah, we did a reflector oven and made like cool little tripod thing. I don't know, just all those little things that we were hoping that you want to do in your trip day, but sometimes you get so busy that you just don't have the time for it, and we were hoping that the outpost would be that. So we did it 3 years ago. Haven't really done it since, but hopefully we can do it again.
Warren, it would be great to hear some of the cool projects that and how you're teaching woodworking and why.
Yeah, well, I'm actually really pumped that I'm on this panel because the shop, I think first and foremost, it has practical purposes in terms of fixing boats and making furniture for the island. Very practical, but I think the more important mission of the shop is to teach, and not just woodworking, but all sorts of different traditional skills. So I really like. Hopefully, I see the shop as kind of like emerging between traditional skills and tripping in the tripping program. And like Kathryn said, and like everyone else is saying, pretty much a big part of the traditional skills program. The dream is that it happens like on trip. So you get to the campsite, and if the campers want to make bush tea, then the headman can take them out, and they can find plants to make tea out of, and you can learn tree identification through those means, and you can learn how to fish and all these things. So my dream for the wood shop is that the wood shop becomes kind of like a bridge between traditional skills and tripping in a different way, and it'll be on the island as an optional. Kids come up to the wood shop, and they get to either fix broken canoes. If I'm really busy, then they're just patching and painting. And if I'm not busy and I have time to prepare, then I have wood milled up, and we have projects for them. And they either do just straight woodworking projects, just like paddle racks and simple things to teach them basic joinery and how like kind of wood works, and kind of like traditional hand skills. And then we also do things like building canoes from scratch. So we'll buy rough cut cedar and mill it up on the island, make the planking and the ribs, and then we boil the ribs with the kids and explain how the lignin works and how the fibers bend when you heat up the wood. And my biggest problem right now in the shop, which is a great problem to have, is that I have too many people up there. People come up all the time, staff, campers. There's like a constant stream of people coming in looking for sandpaper because people want to refinish their paddles, they want to reshape their paddles, they want to fix their canoes. Maybe their canoe doesn't leak, maybe it's fine, but they want to like recane a seat because their seat isn't perfect. So I turn more people away than I think I help. But that's a great problem because there's a huge amount of people that want to learn, which is fantastic. And I really see it as like the junction between tripping, which is just kind of like the brute, like you said, kind of like the ape skills of just like brute man, which is really important, I think, to like the Pathfinder experience, and kind of like the finesse of like craft and being able to paddle around in this like beautiful handmade wooden art piece, you know. And I think it's so cool to be able to start kids really young when we have mix and chips coming up into the shop and doing really basic woodworking projects, and they have the crews coming up and maybe they can bend a couple of ribs on a boat, all the way up into the AAs and the staff, and then the senior staff here in the fall and spring who get to do everything. And when they're not on the senior staff that are up here in the fall and spring, when they're not on a school group, they'll be up on power crew, and then maybe 2 or 3 of them will rotate in and out of the shop. And so we had a project the last 2 years in the spring, and the practical purpose was to make cabin furniture, but we made this really simple blanket chest, and staff were able to come in and learn how to use the bandsaw. They learned how to use the router. They learned how to glue wood, to join wood, to cut grooves to the rabbet, all these really important woodworking skills, and kind of like familiarize themselves with the shop so that in the summertime they're much more useful if they come up and I need help fixing boats. And for me, it's awesome because I learned all these things, most of these things up here, from Jack and from books and from kind of like figuring it out. And then all these things get to be kind of like trickle down through the staff into the campers, and that's kind of like my vision and mission, and it's great. And like Kathryn and I kind of work together on some of these projects. Part of the canoeing AA, the level 3, I guess, is to you have to do canoe maintenance. So I have kids coming out to finish their canoeing AA. They have to come up and work in the shop a little bit, which I think is like a really great junction of the 2 programs.
Thanks, guys. Jeff, before you joined us, I mentioned that you brought paddle and paint to camp, and would you share a little bit about that and your feelings about teaching kids about the wonder of this place for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll have 2 or 3 minutes for questions, and then we'll be done. Okay.
Well, yeah, okay. I'm listening to, I think the word that best suits what I've heard so far is transformation. Transforming the incredible canoe trips and in the place of Algonquin Park, 2,000 lakes. It's just amazing. It's an amazing place. It's so amazing and so emotionally moving that I actually moved from the States, not too far away. I lived in Buffalo. Get here in 4 hours or something, to Ontario on a permanent basis because I wanted to be so close to this area. So I did. And one of my big interests and fears was a little more sharp-edged, I think, than what I've heard so far. And I don't say that this is better it may be worse, was the almost horror that I saw with industrial logging in this park. And it led me to make a study of this in other places. How many other park systems was there in industry as destructive and I would say destructive as it has been here, and in national parks and so on. What's his first name that talked to us this morning? The superintendent. Jay. Yeah. Now Jay is working for the government, and he did broach this thing. But I was, he talked about Doug Pimlott and some of the other old science guys that loved this park and knew so much about it and did wolf studies and so on. And I thought if Pimlott hears this, that extra noise that you heard is him rolling in his grave when he heard forest management words, those particular words substitute for logging and industrial logging. Now this softens the blow, and this makes an inarguable kind of home for this particular industry. Now, a lot of other parks systems don't allow this kind of activity to go on. So anyway, my right or wrong, my emotional makeup led me to use my art. And now I'm an artist. I paint pictures. I paint pictures of the wilderness. I painted hundreds of pictures of Algonquin Park in different places, and it is an emotional experience for me to paint my way. Well, first of all, I was helped by the fact that I never flunked an art course, and that's because I never took one, and that I would have. And I virtually taught myself, but I always had it hooked to my emotional connection with Algonquin Park, in fact, to start with, and then other places like Lake Superior and so on. So I developed a little program called Look, See, Paint, which is so stupidly simple that anybody can do it. People that are sure that they have no talent can do this kind of a little art outside. We use little pieces of paper that are 4 by 6 inches. They're real watercolor paper in a little kit that's 6 colors in it. That's all. They're really good colors. And we go outside with this equipment, and we have this emotional and very quiet and very peaceful and very non-competitive experience, which really has to do with intimate sensitivity and respect for nature. And I thought that, science for 400 years has been teaching us, Western science has been teaching us how to live on this planet and why we live on it and how we live on it. And but we're still wrecking the place. Excuse my language, but we're still wrecking the place. And why? What's the missing element? Well, I thought the missing element was love. Well, you can't go skipping around the place saying love, 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 love. I love you all the time, can you? But you can use words like compassion and passion and feeling damn strong about things. And so we could use those words in connecting. I think I see myself, before I see myself as an artist, I see myself as a connector, especially between kids and nature, hoping that insertion of that kind of reaction to nature doesn't require scientific language that a lot of people aren't any good at, including me. So they don't do it at all. And now they can stand up and say, you can't do that over there because I love that. And so do my buddies. And we're going to make a case on that basis. So I've done that for 20 years. And now, just to skip along and hand this along, Will, if you will, so it became a kind of soft, loving way of advocating for nature, using this soft other side of us. My goal would be these words, that I would hope to have, let's bring it back to Pathfinder, everybody who takes a Pathfinder trip and uses this equipment with them, which they do have because Mac Rand had this really open mind and fast talk about transformation. It was revolutionary, And we got this program that I just described briefly, working on the canoe trips here. I would like every kid to go home from Pathfinder and other wilderness experiences, seeing themselves not just connected with nature, but as nature.
Well said. Couple brief questions and comments.
I just wanted to I remember Jeff, when we did the painting trips, the coolest thing was Jeff put all the stuff out and had all the kids, and he said, okay, paint that cedar tree. And so they took out the brown and they slapped some brown and they put the green on and slapped some green. And he brought all the kids over to the tree and said, point to me where the brown is. And they all looked at it, and then they really saw it. And it was amazing to see these kids looking at it and they're like, oh, there's some red there, and there's gray, and there's blue. That's some green over there. On the bark? There's no green on bark. But, yeah, there is, right? It was a wild, very cool thing. Who had the question?
I'm not sure which panelist otherwise going to give this the chance to be said, so I'm going to address this to Lance. Jeff mentioned transformation, where you were transformed from a geek to a cool person because of our environmental knowledge. I mean, in Rags, I guess, was transformed from cool tripper to geek tripper. I mean, so, but there's been a transformation of ladies at Camp Pathfinder. And for many people who haven't been here and have been watching this happen over the last 10 years in particular, and I think one of those ladies is Kathryn Babin. So if you would say something just a little bit about ladies and that transformation, but about something special about Kathryn, which people wouldn't otherwise know about. No, Lance.
I have a 10-minute talk this afternoon, and come to that.
Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists on this round. This was great. Fun for me. Oh, sorry, one more.
Bill Jabs, I was up here on staff when Lance was nature lore and director, and also when Bob was talking about head of canoe tripping. And one of the stories I've told at least 1,000 times, Lance, is we used to go out in the evening with our sleeping bag or a blanket and down to the canoe dock, and Lance would give us a history of the galaxies and every star and everything, and it's just very fond memories of the time up here. And when Bob talks about people resisting what he tried to introduce, that's an understatement 1,000 times. There was a lot of resistance when he tried to introduce them.
All right, that concludes the environmental education panel. Thank you.